All right, everybody, we are back. Next speaker is Jakub WITOWSKI, if I say it correct, from the University of Wrocalw. My friends, how can we wonder that Hector wields the spear so well? Some god is ever by his side to protect him. New insights on the role of spear in Mycenaean warfare in the light of user analysis. Jakub, the floor is yours in a while.
Good evening, everyone. Okay. Start video. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Firstly, I would like to thank you for the invitation. I'm enormously glad I can be here tonight and tell a few words about potential role of the spears in the Mycenaean warfare and on the basis of the usual analysis. Undoubtedly, a spear had played a crucial role in the equipment of ancient warriors in the Mediterranean, and
sorry, that's my fault. That's my fault. Now we're on it.
Okay, one more time. Undoubtedly, a spear had played a crucial role in the equipment of the Asian warriors, and the Mycenaean soldiers were not certainly an exception in this regard. It needs to be emphatically emphasized that debate on the function of the spear in the Mycenaean warfare in general is a part of the broader discourse and is encumbered by the many preconceptions concerning the mode of use of this weapon in the battle conditions. Namely, for many years, scholars focused on prehistoric warfare were willing to commonly share the widespread belief that the spear should be considered only a thrusting or throwing weapon. This view has been debunked only in recent decades, and usual analysis made a great contribution to the state of affairs. However, until I pass to the focal point of my presentation, which concerns the potential role in the military practice of Mycenaeans, I wish to shortly define the usual the traceological method itself. In a nutshell, usual analysis, sometimes called traceology, is a method in archaeology to identify the functions of the artifact tools by closely examining their working surface and etched with the microscope. Initially, this method was applied only for the stone tools, but over time, scholars started to use this method for the studies on metal artifacts and the bone tools. In order to better understand the role of usual analysis for the research on bronze spearheads, we should take a look on the contribution of this method to the broadly defined conflict archaeology. The first merit of that method for studies of prehistoric warfare is debunking on the long-term prevailing view that the bronze weapons, especially swords, were only cult or symbolic objects. First, usual analysis of the bronze swords have been conducted by the Christiansen on the material from Hungary, and he proved with no doubt that the bronze swords were fully efficient weapons in the battle conditions. What has been confirmed by further experimentation method. Also, this method provides empirical evidence for reconstruction of prehistoric fighting techniques. I wish to emphasize that so far the general debate about function of Mycenaean spears and potential diversity of their function is based only on typological division. So I assume that the application of this method may shed slightly more empirical light on further considerations of that topic, and also subsequent user analysis conducted in the different parts of the world yielded us a huge base of combat-related marks that may be used as a comparative material for further research in the future. At this point, I wish to briefly describe the basic types of combat-related marks that occur on this edges of bladed bronze weapons, unless we have to keep in mind that the scope of traces occurring on the bronze weapons is much more broader. First of them, namely, presumably the commonest trace occurring on the bladed weapons is so-called V-shaped notch. It used to be thought that this trace is a result of brief contact between two blades when the one weapon has been rebounded almost instantaneously after the blow. Another one is so-called U-shaped notch. It is usually associated with twisting movement between two weapons, or just the slightly longer point of contact. Another very relevant trace that we may encounter in the course of user analysis of the weapons is edge flattening. It is a result of contacts of sharp edge with the flat hard surface. Another trace which is very common, especially in the case of spearheads, is tip pressure. Its genesis is analogical to the edge flattening. Another one is fissure, which creates in the situation during the situation when the power of blow exceeds the strength of copper alloy, and the ripening trace, which is an outcome of one blades slipping one another at a very acute angle. And moving on to the substance of my research, it needs to be talked a bit about the user analysis of spearheads conducted hitherto in the different parts of the world. The first user analysis of Bronze Age spearheads has been conducted by Schauer for the material from Germany, and he noted that many types of damage occurring on the spearhead's edge concurs to those known from the sword's edge, and different scholars, namely the Kate Anderson and Christian Horn, followed his conclusion, and their research led them to the similar conclusion, suggesting that the function of the spear in the Bronze Age could be much more diversified that it used to be thought so far. Here we gather exemplary traces of the traces recognized on the spearheads from Scandinavia, from Northern Europe. It is a V-shaped notch and tip pressure. And the fact that so many different traces have been recognized on the spearheads coming from different parts of Europe inclined me to pose two main research questions in reference to the Mycenaean spearheads, namely, were the Mycenaean spearhead fully functional items, and can we talk about any functional diversity in the case of respective types of Mycenaean spearheads based on traces revealed in the course of USWE analysis. My methodology comprises of four main points. The first of them is as follows. All the spearheads examined so far come from mainland Greece, and their chronology ranges from MH3 to LH3A period. And they have been classified according to Hoxman typology, because it is much more simpler than typology created by Avila. All analyses have been carried out by the means of digital microscope in LaTeX. Of course, it's better to use advanced stereoscopic microscope, but in account of the fact that the material from Greek museums cannot be transported abroad, I was forced to use more maneuverable equipment. Also, both sides of each spearhead have been examined, of course, if the state of their preservation allowed for that, because unfortunately, some spearheads were too poor preserved so that they could be examined on the both sides. And each recognized damage has been photographed and drawn from the pre-prepared sketch. Now I wish to present some exemplary traces recognized on the Mycenaean spearheads from National Archaeological Museum in Athens. Of course, I wish to present all of them, but they are too plenty to show them during my short presentation. First of the spearheads that evince many diversified type of traces was so-called C-type spearhead from grave cycle A at Mycenae, and it is, as I said previously, permanently stored in the National Archaeological Museum of Athens. In the course of its USWE analysis, I have recognized U-shaped notch and also shallow dent or U-shaped notch. We should to remember that this classification is very fluent with the associated fissure. Also, the thickening of the edge or rolling of the edge has been also found on the spearhead edge, and previously mentioned V-shaped notch, which is a very common trace occurring on the bladed bronze weapons. I also examined D-type spearhead that has been found in the chamber tomb at Prosimna. Its chronology is similar, but the only trace that have been found in the course of USWE analysis was tip pressure, which is not what is not surprising, because this type of spearhead is characterized by very massive morphology and clearly coincide with the general morphology of the javelin's head. So such a kind of damage is something, as we say, normal in the case of such specimens. Generally spoken, I have examined so far 30 spearheads, but I have no time, sufficiently much time to present all of them. So I've decided to choose the most representative user marks. And my preliminary conclusion is that the majority of spearheads evinces the presence of damage typical for swords, what may suggest that the fighting techniques with the Mycenaean spearheads involved at least elements of fencing, as it takes place in the case of the material from different parts of Europe, and only 10%, so a very scarce part of the material, bears the traces indicating on the mode of use typical for thrusting or throwing weapon, which also concur to the general outcomes of user analysis of the bronze spearheads from different parts of the work. So we may say that the general tendency is visible and still kept. Of course, the mentioned research, the study I wanted to continue, demands another steps. The first of them will be the broadening of the basis of material to be analyzed up to 100 of spearheads, what I'm going to have done in the upcoming months. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jakub. So all went well. And now from user analysis on metals and spearheads, we shall move to user analysis on stone.
Not really user analysis yet.
Like that.
Shall we take some time to...
Take some time, yes. We'll take some time to prepare the next presentation. Be so good with you. All right. Well, our next speaker is Eleni CHREIAZOMENOU from the University of Crete. Stone-scapes of revolution, ground stone tool use, reuse, recycling, and disuse in Bronze Age Katalymata Gavdos. Hopefully all goes well.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Πώς κάνει παρουσίαση? Δεν το παίρνει. Εντάξει. Μα ήταν και σωστή διαφάνεια. Ωραία. So, Adonis already mentioned my title, so I will go on and start this presentation. Gavdos is a small island of 30 square kilometers, but the largest of the islands surrounding Crete. Located in the Libyan Sea, 21 nautical miles south of Horosphakion, off the southwestern Cretan shores, it is endowed with a rich local ecosystem, various natural resources, and alternating landscape. Sand dunes along the northern coasts, hills among dried stream beds, and steep cliffs, especially along the western part. An archaeological survey on the island has highlighted its diachronic human presence from early prehistory to recent times, already in the Paleolithic and the Neolithic, and with an emphasis on the Bronze Age and the Hellenistic, Roman, and Byzantine periods. Since 2005, the University of Crete is conducting an excavation at the site of Katalymata on the Tsirmiris Hill. This has brought to light a rather large building, which was intensively occupied in the mid-2nd millennium BC, the late Bronze Age or the Neo-Palatial period in Crete, at the end of which it was destroyed and or abandoned. Early and especially Middle Bronze Age architectural remains, however, and movable finds show previous use of the site. Abundant and various and mostly locally made ceramics, storing, transporting, cooking, and other vases, numerous and variable ground stone tools, and multiple other stone artifacts, vases, whetstones, and other, as well as bronze objects, attest for the multiple activities, domestic and industrial, while various plant remains, animal bones, seashells, and other finds add to the picture of storage, production, and consumption in and around the building. My PhD research focuses on the systematic study of the large assemblage of more than 700 groundstone objects from the site of Katalymata. Tool types include grinding and percussion tools, containers, bedrocks, used surfaces, multiple use tools, weights, and others, as well as a large number of pebbles and cobbles of suitable raw materials, shapes, and sizes, with no visible traces of use. The latter are materials that were brought to the site, and they probably either concern artifacts used in a manner or extent that did not result in the development of wear traces, or rocks collected as blanks and kept for later use. Aside from a handful of cases, raw materials were locally collected from secondary deposits, such as stream and coastal sites. I will briefly go through what is brownstone, because the terminology is a bit confusing. So groundstone, the term groundstone describes artifacts that have been either manufactured by means of grinding, abrasion, polishing, and impaction, and those used in grinding, abrading, and polishing and impaction activities. This category thus includes utilitarian tools, such as querns and grinders, mortars and pestles, hammerstones and pounders, abraders, smoothers, and other formal and informal tools. Non-tool artifacts include luxury objects, such as stone vases, ornaments, beads, seals, figurines, and others. From a relational perspective, groundstone tools are not solely associated with mundane everyday practices, such as food production. They can potentially carry social meaning beyond their use value and accommodate broader purposes, acting as components in socioeconomic and symbolic practices. As such, they should be dealt with as artifacts that are produced and consumed within specific cultural contexts, where people produce and reproduce ideas, traditions, values, and perceptions of their surroundings. These processes can be elucidated by the elements of raw material selection, design, and manufacture, use and disuse, and thus closely related to the biography of artifacts. In addition, the spatial and social context of groundstone tool use and deposition constitute important features for understanding production, consumption, and discard within different forms of prehistoric behavior. In this presentation, so yeah, let's stay in the previous one. Okay. In this presentation, I will briefly discuss the different patterns of use, reuse, recycling, and disuse of groundstone tools in Katalymata as a means to stimulate hypotheses concerning their relational character. Particular examples of groundstone tool handling and management from the site will be presented in an effort to explore these stone-scapes of revolution, when the use of groundstone becomes qualitatively different. Tool types, technomorphological characteristics, degree of use and preservation will be examined in relation to their archaeological context, in search of changes in the artifact's function at different stages of their life cycles, illustrated during deposition. The analysis of the Katalymata assemblage is still ongoing, and so these observations should be considered preliminary. Deposition represents the moment when an artifact enters the archaeological record and illustrates processes of either abandonment, loss, discard, or caching. For groundstone tools, functional and spatial data can be used to address questions concerning these processes. The context of a deposition can provide information on artifacts operating in their primary or anticipated use, or transformations of reuse, recycle, or disuse that may have resulted in use in a different activity, completely shifted their usability, or even broadened their function and cultural connotations. We will begin with use. Use of the groundstone artifacts from Bronze Age Katalymata will be discussed in combination of technological elements and aspects of the spatial organization. Groundstone artifacts are found throughout the site in different settings, such as the interiors of rooms, outdoor spaces, around the vicinity of the building. Room 7 is a space that produced very high numbers of groundstone artifacts, mainly grinding and percussion tools. There, groundstone artifacts were found in large clusters and were probably items of a toolkit, probably stored in some kind of installation that collapsed and used in activities that took place in the vicinity of the room. This photo is from one part of the room where the groundstone were really accumulated in close to a corner. You can see that like it's this part of the room. There were more, but in this photo we have already collected them, and a lot were also found down here on the green. The green indicates groundstone in this plan, and yeah, so they were almost clustered like. Sorry, they were clustered like in all of this part of the room. A similar context was probably the case for the clustered tools close to the north wall of space 10. So again, we can see these are like in a line close to the wall. There were also a lot of smaller tools that were collected before this photo was taken. All right. Now we move to space 15, where a passive grinding tool set on a small stone platform was found in its lower stratums. You can see it's down here at this corner. In the central part of the same space, a large deep stone gurna was fixed in the floor, the base set in its substrate, apparently used in situ. These settings appear to indicate configurations and the spatial context of the organization of activities taking place in each of these rooms. The classification of tool types and analysis of their distribution can potentially provide information on the type and character of activities taking place at the site and can stimulate some thoughts on relevant activity areas. Furthermore, patterns in this distribution can give further insight on the occupational character of Katalymata in general and the organization of production and consumption within everyday life of its inhabitants. Reuse refers to when an item is employed in a different activity from the one it was initially designed for, whether that tool was remanufactured or not. At Katalymata, reuse has been documented for handheld as well as larger implements. In room 16, for example, a passive grinding stone was subsequently used as a percussion platform. Use as a grinding tool resulted in a smooth concave surface that would not have been functional for further grinding without maintaining the tool. However, the tool was subsequently used for hammering, pounding, and crushing, an activity which resulted in deep percussion marks and a depression on the active surface, making the tool unfit for further grinding activities. Moving again to room 7, a flat grinding slab was employed in a secondary context as a work surface and bears marks probably from a tool with an elongated edge. I would like to say a bronze chisel, but let's say this is like an informal comment for now. This secondary use took place while the implement was still functional as a grinding tool, I mean. A different example of redesigning now, so reuse, but of a tool that has been transformed by manufacture, is evidenced by a fragmentary stone object with a large biconical perforation, which was apparently shaped from an original grinding tool or grinding slab. Reuse is a form of curation that can be explained in environmental, techno-functional, as well as socioeconomic factors. Availability of raw materials, frequency of procurement trips, and raw material suitability and durability constitute practical forces that could lead to the reuse of items. Factors such as the sense of ownership or the passing of an object from one owner to another can also play an important role in the life history of artifacts. Such social manifestations are indeed documented in many ethnographic accounts. Moreover, the ethnographic literature suggests that groundstone tools, and especially grinding slabs, have generally very long use lives. Therefore, a tendency of artifacts passing from older to later occupants should also be considered. Again, such a hypothesis cannot be tested yet for the Katalymata assemblage. However, the possibility of scarcity of raw materials does not seem very plausible when considering the relatively small number of reused tools and the accumulation of pebbles and cobbles on the site, unless this concerned a short-spanned, time-specific or localized event. Following Adams, recycling occurs when an artifact is designed for and used in an activity, but eventually is employed in a completely different context. Recycling would thus shift the tool's function. In prehistoric contexts, this is the case of groundstone artifacts incorporated in architectural structures. Used as building materials, they consequently lose their function as tools. Such cases of groundstone artifacts used in wall constructions is documented at Katalymata. For a number of these objects, For a number of these objects, usually of hand-sized tools, surfaces are not entirely visible, so tool types could not be documented. However, these stand out easily from the limestone boulders, marls, and soft porous sandstones used for the walls of the building in general. Tool types that were documented concern grinding tools and mortars. The two mortars built in walls in spaces 15 and 16 were both broken and heavily worn. Grinding stones were not worn out by use, but were either broken or intact. Other occasions of groundstone tool recycling documented at the Katalymata building complex also concern the use in architecture. A rectangular grinding slab was found close to to a wall in space 14 and enclosed in a two-row semicircle stone installation. The excavator considered it to be in secondary use as a pottery stand and in possible relation to a large pottery container found close by. Groundstone tools are also used as pillar bases, like in the center of room 9. You can see it, it's the green stone in the middle of the room on the plan. As seats, like in the bench in an open air space on the side. So again, here, you can see that these stand out from the typical stones used on the bench again, or as door sockets, like in room 1. In these 3 later cases, the implements used were not worn out and were still fit for their primary use, while the grinding stone used in the bench was either very lightly used or not used at all. Reasons that justify recycling can vary. Recycling can be systematic or opportunistic and can, as reuse also does, suggest practical as well as cultural processes. At Katalymata, the use of groundstone in wall building is not a common practice, but is documented, as previously said, in the lower sector. There, the architectural plan is very complex. Well-built walls are overlapped or intersected by later building events. In these later events, many walls and structures are crude, and many different materials in secondary use are incorporated in them. Concerning groundstone, boulder-sized blanks that would have been more appropriate for the building of walls and other architectural structures are rarely found on the site. Thus, the fact that the larger implements used in these configurations almost entirely concern tools seems consistent with the scarcity of larger blanks. Another consideration to be taken into account, and possibly for the use of groundstone in walls, and possibly in relation to the previous one, is whether one or more episodes of such rough building, where anything at hand will do, correspond to either events of crisis or to the improvised character of the building of the buildings of the lower sector. Disuse is a deliberate process in which an artifact is left with no intention of future use. This is the end of its use life. Such depositions can either be acts of abandonment, discard, or can carry symbolic meaning. An interesting event of groundstone disuse comes from space 12 of the Katalymata building complex. This elongated space was paved with a thick layer of densely sorted gravel mixed with soil, possibly a flooring technique for drainage purposes. When excavated, a rather interesting stratum was revealed. Many small animal bones, large pottery sherds, and 100 stone artifacts were recovered, most of them laying on the floor of the room close to the bedrock. Here you can see like a succession of the excavation process. So actually Vivi was was excavating this room. You can see that they start appearing in the first photo, and then we can see like the lowest layer of the room, and the farthest is the corner where we had a huge accumulation of these tools. Object categories from this room include a wide range of tool types, such as grinding, percussion, multiple use tools, and others. In addition, 33 other items with no visible traces of manufacture or use were found. The degree of preservation of these artifacts is quite interesting. 78% of the tools, 78 tools, because they are 100, were preserved intact or complete, and for their most part were not heavily used or not too worn out for further use, while a couple were fragmented and weathered due to taphonomic processes. The character of this event, whether localized or over a larger scale, remains elusive for the time being. Groundstone was either stored in this room during its earlier use and subsequently left there after a possible architectural rearrangement, or it was discarded as waste and covered by the gravel floor. However, the contextual evidence strongly suggests that this act of disuse was in fact intentional. Can this episode be explained solely in practical terms, such as the effort involved, physical hindrances, and reuse value? Mostly expedient tools, i.e., meaning tools with no or minimal modifications, are present in the assemblage, while 17 of these tools were actually formal tools. That means manufactured. Of these formal tools, 76% were complete. Fragmented formal tools concerned 3 grinding slabs and 1 grinding tool that was weathered to classify otherwise. However, when considering the large number of expedient tools compared to formal ones, of which most are grinding slabs in the Katalymata groundstone assemblage in general, this representation of formal tools in room 12 should not be viewed as striking. The act of discard, as any other mechanism of deposition, can embody cultural notions such as socioeconomic concepts of what is considered waste and of the value of objects, or of symbolic behaviors regulating acts of disposal, abandonment, or discard. In this sense, the deposition and discard of groundstone groundstone artifacts, such as in room 12, should not be explored with purely utilitarian considerations, but as a combination of different elements and ideas concerning material culture and of how these objects were perceived by the occupants of Bronze Age Katalymata. Although at this point, the analysis of the groundstone assemblage is not advanced enough to provide a basis for solid hypotheses to be formulated, hopefully this presentation has pointed out some of the key elements and basic processes that should be taken into consideration when exploring changes in the function of tools during their life histories. The use, reuse, recycling, and disuse of these stone-scapes of revolution suggest that the treatment of groundstone tools at Bronze Age Katalymata may well be understood by a combination of practical and cultural terms, and that their potential interpretative sequences are essential for exploring prehistoric behavior. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eleni. Now, after this adventurous session, we can proceed to the discussion. Please, if you have questions, submit them in chat for you people on Zoom, and for us being here alive and in person. Yes, of course. The procedure will go as previously. All right, I think we are ready to accept your questions. I think so. We have one from Yorgos. Keep the conversation going. There you go, my man. That's.
So I have two questions, in fact. The first is to Ms. Phoebe. So how could the scored vessels could be related with scored objects of art?
I think that this is a good question, because apart from vessels, we find scored decoration, but it's not actually decoration, maybe. We're not sure about that. But as I mentioned, we find them in other objects of utilitarian use, like urns or hearths or whatever. These kind of treatment of surface treatment of all objects has to do with the epicardial cultures. Is one of the characteristic things of the epicardial cultures. They seem to be very, they like this kind, or it symbolizes something about their culture. So they repeat it all the time in all things that involve a symbolic or cultural expression. I think this is a way to explain why we find this kind of treatment in other objects, not only in Crete or Anatolia or whatever, but in the whole Mediterranean, even in central Mediterranean.
And thank you very much for your answer. And the next question is for Jakub. So it's a long question, and I need your personal, informal or formal, whatever you like, answer. So if there is no thrusting or throwing, considering the length of the spearheads or the spears, and if there is a possible use of a sword-like use, okay, could be assumed the combined use of spears or the spearheads themselves with the performance of a sophisticated martial arts.
It's a very good question and very long question, as you mentioned previously. Yes, I don't state that there was no thrusting. Just it is one of the possible of the ways of spear use on the battlefield, and it must happen on the ancient battlefields, as I emphasized. I think so, but I think perhaps I didn't do it correctly, but I want to emphasize that the spear use was more diversified that we might assume so far, and presumably such a factors like spear length, spearhead length, and many different technicals should be also taken into account. And I actually wanted to do it because the huge majority of the spears to be analyzed by me is characterized by extreme length, and it is, for me at least, it is one of the most important indicators on their sword-like manner of use on the battlefield. And yes, I suspect that that spear could be used in sophisticated manner, and also some ethnographic analogies point on that, indicate on that. At least we can give an example from Africa, and I mean the spears called assegai, used by Zulu tribe against British soldiers, for example. They are distinguished by extreme length, and as we know from the historical accounts, they were used in the sword-like manner for cats, for throwing as well, because for cats for thrusting as well, because as we certainly know, sword is also thrusting weapon. And as I said, they were used in many different ways, and we know that from the historical accounts provided by the people who died not so long ago. And that's one of the points, one of the starting points to assume that the same situation took place in the antiquity. So so far, the group of spearheads analyzed by me, it's not so impressive, and it has to be definitely broadened in order to provide reliable outcomes in the term of statistic. But dealing with the knowledge and material we get so far, we can for sure assume that the diversified, sophisticated fighting with the spear could be possible. I think so.
Okay, so I have also a question for Jakub, and thanks a lot for this presentation. So my question is, because all the spearheads you analyzed, they are from the context of the graves. And is it possible that this specific useware is somehow connected to the context of the deposition, especially if we consider, the special also attitude to some of the weapons in the Mycenaean culture and also in Mycenaean tombs, like I don't know, the ritual killing of the weapons that is in Pylos, on Kos and many other graves and tombs. Is it somehow possible that you have in the context of the grave a different attitude and different useware than it would be in other contexts? I don't know if we have finds from other contexts. I don't think so, right?
For this moment, it's okay. Can I talk? for this moment, it's really hard to settle this issue because all the spearheads analyzed by me so far comes from graves from interments, and they vary a lot in the terms of clusters of use-where marks and the kinds of use-where marks. But what is strikingly, the spearheads coming from the set of spearheads, like comprised by 2 or 3 specimens, including also extremely long spearheads like 40 centimeters, usually do not have any relevant marks. Such a kind of situation takes place in the tomb from Prosimna, from where we got the set of 3 spearheads exceeding 30 centimeters, and they don't evince any relevant use-where marks, so they look like quasi-cult objects, but it seems almost impossible that they weren't used. So for now, it is kind of mystery to be solved. But another question, it might be connected to the issue raised by you, is whether the spearheads reflects any real function of the object in the lifetime transferred into grave context. And I take such a query into account in my research, but for now I cannot tell anything relevant on the basis of material examined so far, because it is too scarce to infer anything ultimate on that. But yes, I take into account potential diversity of use-where mark in the terms of context from the spearheads come from.
We have a question from Yannis Papas, who is online, and I will read it. It's for Vivi Vlahu, and he's asking, assuming that in many of the sites where this type of ware has been found, is there any report of finding a piece of it that was misfired, so we can assume that it came from the conjoined site?
I think I cannot understand the question. Okay. Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. To be honest, I'm not sure about this question, Yannis. The indications we have is that after 2600 or 2500 BC onwards, the majority of these wares I mentioned are very well fired. But to be honest, I don't have any information about being misfired. I suppose you're asking about the pyrotechnology used. I say that in many cases the temperatures that these vessels were fired did exceed the 800 degrees Celsius, but I don't know for any misfired shards or vessels.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank all 4 speakers for their presentations and their patience. I think the corollary of the day is no more hybrid conferences. I promise we won't do this again, not if I can help it. So I have one question for Vivi Vlachou and then for Jakub WITOWSKI. So Vivi, I noticed in your maps, I noticed a small hole in Cyprus. There's no dot in Cyprus. And, you know, I don't want to sound clever, but because I teach Cyprus this semester, and I had this very course the other day, there's in the later phase of the Neolithic, the Sotira phase, the typical pottery of the phase is exactly combed ware. And they do this funny thing. Not only do they comb the surface, but we have painted pottery, which is an imitation. Doesn't that fit your, shouldn't it be in your map, or is it too early for you?
This is a very nice question. As a matter of fact, Cyprus is a very problematic situation in terms of chronology, first of all, and in the research context, because we don't have so many sites to compare and to be able to be sure and say that we have cobbed or scored or of what chronology these are. The Sotira case is maybe the only case we have for sure that this is a cobbed pottery category, but we're not sure if this material, as you said, is an imitation of other groups, because Cyprus was a place that many people and many different groups from the Levant passed by. To be honest, I have left Cyprus outside my research because I don't have so many securities about what happened there.
I mean, in terms of dating, you mentioned that your pottery, the one you examine, is 4th, 3rd millennium, right? So the Sotira phase should be in the 5th, 4th millennium. In terms of dating, is it totally unrelated to what you want to do, or does it, is it the earliest appearance of this sort of ware, maybe? If the datings are correct, if the chronology is correct.
The 4th millennium is the phase that of the expansion of the epicardial wares and the epicardial cultures. But as far as we know, or in the archaeological literature, is very. I haven't seen any mentions on epicardial pottery on Cyprus. So, from this aspect, I have left this aside, and I do not include this material in the whole research. But maybe sometime I have to do that. So. And find out what actually happens there. Another fact is that the majority of the material that resembles the wares that I have put in under my research, in most cases, I suppose that are imitations, but in order to say what is an imitation, you have to have a prototype and be sure that this is your prototype and this material imitates that prototype. I have not done much research on Cyprus, and the main reason is these chronological discrepancies I have come about with.
Further question for Jakub WITOWSKI. you presented you're using a method in examining Mycenaean material, a method which you yourself said that it was developed on the basis of material from Britain and Scandinavia. Of course, there was no time for you to present the whole research, but is there any previous research like the one you are conducting now on Mycenaean spearheads? And would you say that compared to the Scandinavian material, because I'm sure original research has reached some conclusions, is the Mycenaean sample that you have chosen that exists, is it big enough, do you think, for the extraction of some sound conclusions? Thank you.
Yeah, certainly is not sufficiently big to create a general conclusion, ultimate conclusion. But as I mentioned in my presentation, it is kind of preliminary insights derived from the very initial step of the research, and I'm gonna to broaden the group that needs to be applied to the study in the upcoming months. As if I know correctly, there was no hitherto similar research conducted on the material from Mycenae, so it is kind of the new research, of course, new in reference to the Mycenaean area, to the Mediterranean area in general. And well, what's the third part of your question? Because I might. Yeah, there is quite impressive literature on Mycenaean spearheads, mostly by Hockman and Avila, but their consideration has also a theoretical character and are based on the morphology of their spearheads, not on any more empirical method. So far, if I know correctly, yes. Yeah, it's on topology, on typological division, not on the any method that involves the piece of empiria.
I have another question for Jakub, a methodological one. You have shown us these scratches, damages on the spearhead surfaces. Mm-hmm. So, concerning the momentum, that is the, you know, it's the unit that when we have velocity, mm-hmm. and the mass of an object onto the other, so we have the unit called momentum. That is, you understand? Okay, so this is a little bit of physics. Mm-hmm. So, have you examined the length of the damages? Have you examined the power, the force
that is required to create? Yes. So far not. It's very advanced kind of analysis, and of course I'm going to do that and consult my methodological side of the research with specialists from different fields, like physics. But also, of course, I'm going to take into account of either this aspect of research, and so far I cannot tell anything about that for this moment, but I'm gonna to do that, of course.
No, it won't be. But it could be because it's to Jakub, obviously. I mean, not obviously, but I wanted to follow up about broadening your the amount of material that you have. Because in the presentation you said that that all the spearheads that you checked so far were MH3 to LH3A. And my question is that, are you going to get any materials from 3B or 3C phase? Is it even possible? Is it even any material available from those phases? And I think it's relevant given the, that those phases especially would be possibly where some changes could happen to the combat techniques. So maybe it can, it be important for you.
I would love to, because it may turn out to be relevant with regard to the catching of the transition moment in the evolution of fighting techniques towards the end of Palatial period and general collapse of the Mycenaean civilization. So that will be good catch, I think so. And yeah, I'm going to spread my interest towards slightly younger material from later periods. But also I need to remember about possibly even representation of each type of the spears in order to keep statistic order. So I need to combine these two aspects, the chronological one and the typological one, because I want to obtain the most concise data I can have in such a kind of research.
And then in relation, would you agree that possibly your results, I know that your sample is small and it's all preliminary, and obviously this is not, this is not like there are no conclusions here yet. But would you say that maybe the results that you have so far, part of the reason for the conclusions that you reached, that you showed us at the end, are because all of the material that you checked so far is early, and that the later material, when possibly from what I know, they could actually develop formations and start using formations during combat, that then the user will change, and and this is a factor that possibly affects your results a lot. Like,
yeah, it is possible. Yeah, I agree totally, and it needs to be considered as well. But if it is so, it's very interesting conclusion on development on Mycenaean warfare in general. So yeah, I also wish to thank you for this this suggestion, because it may shed completely new light on the changes that took place for the whole time of the developing of fighting techniques in the Bronze Age Greece. And as I said, I do not exclude such a possibility as you mentioned about. Thanks. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I would like to ask Yannis Papas, that is virtually with us.
Yes.
I would like to ask you, Yannis, one thing. Can you hear me? In your presentation, you showed us a kiln from the island of Chaos, isn't it? I would like to ask in what degrees Celsius could pottery be fired in such kind of kiln as that of Chaos?
You are in my mind, Vivi, because the question that I try to make for is about this site. Unfortunately, this kiln was excavated 70 years ago, and the excavator didn't pay attention to this kiln. Unfortunately, he didn't find misfired sherds inside the kiln, and he tried to date with the general context of the kiln. So that's why if you read any synthetic publication about the early Bronze Age kilns, you will see that this kiln is not referred. I read again a small text. Imagine that the reference about this kiln is only 5 or 6 lines in his publication. And I thought that I should refer it in this presentation in order to support only the idea that in Aegean we change the way that we construct the kilns, and there is a line, a geographical line from the east to the west, which follows the same tradition with the pottery process. So we can say that this kiln will be very interesting if we re-examine the sherds that Cascade found 70 years ago.
Okay, thank you, Yanis.
All right, I would like to make some questions. One for Yanis and one for Eleni. I'll start with Yanis first because we have you on the speakers. It's better to get on with that. Okay. Well, it's actually questions about Gavdos. Maybe it would be better to discuss in some other time about that. But perhaps now it's going to be like provoking for more people to think about Gavdos. So the first one is that, as Yanis, you know very well, at Gavdos we have at space 16 we have an area where extensive fire is being attested, and we've been discussing all these years whether this could be a kiln or not, or a furnace or whatever. My question is, I reckon, I figured from your presentation as well, that kilns are mostly located at open spaces, right? Is that correct? It is. So would it make sense to have either a furnace or a kiln in a space which is kind of not buried but covered from two sides, and perhaps even not perhaps lower from the level of the main side, the main
mobility zone.
Low in a lower level from the main area, the main space of the site of the structure. Would that make sense? I mean, isn't it a bit weird to have a fireplace located underneath your structure, your basics, your main structure?
First of all, we have to think that in which period can we date this furnace or kiln? We have to know in the period that they used this structure, what was around it. If the space was open or semi-open, yes, we have some examples and from ethnographical projects and sites in South Africa and on North Africa. But I'm not sure if we can talk about a pottery kiln or a pottery small furnace in this in Katalymata site, because we don't have small finds that can prove that. You know, there are a lot of furnaces, different type of furnaces for different uses. They may wanted that furnace in order to burn or fire another kind of material, not pottery. Or they would like to do something not with a lot of a big degrees temperature. So I cannot answer you why they chose this location. I can say to you, but it's not certain if this was a pottery kiln like the one that I showed from Gavdos also, some meters far away from Katalymata.
Okay, this makes sense, but I understand from your answer that if at Gavdos the said space was either a kiln or a furnace, I'm not talking about a pottery kiln or whatever, but actually to use it, its use required higher temperatures, then it should have been in the open space, like to make use of the air, the streams of the air, I suppose. Right?
Yes, because if you fire something in 600 degrees and you have it in a room, in a room, you will not be able to survive inside the room, unfortunately. You can see, I showed one experimental project from Joe Day and Maggie Kobik about Priniatikos Pyrgos. And if you saw the picture, they constructed in an open space. And they showed the video in another program. And if you saw the temperature and the whole area around this small kiln, you could understand what I mean. Imagine that when a kiln fires, you cannot be next to the kiln. You have to be 10 meters away, far from the kiln, because the temperature is very hot. Another example is that many years ago, the French archaeological team found 2 kilns, Middle Minoan, inside in a room of Maya site. They made a mistake. They were inside a room and they couldn't fire this. It was just an oven.
All right, thank you very much. This is actually quite helpful on that. So should I continue with Eleni? Yes, all right. Thank you, Yannis. So the question for Eleni was, let me recollect my thoughts. On that room that it was the game, I can't remember which one, but the one with the 100 tools, or the room 12. Room 12. I figured that we have a single burial event there of the 100 tools. So this is an event of deposition of groundstone tools, which, as I remember, some of them were quite used, others were less used but still used, I guess, and some of them were broken or whatsoever. Now the question is, I take it that this event indicates a phase, an event of occupation or use of a change, I guess, in Katalymata. Can we notice, depending on the tools buried there and the tools that could be dated to a later phase in the Katalymata, a change in the use of ground stone tools? Can we notice something like that? I mean, like having tools for said use, and then the majority of the groundstone tools to be for a different purpose than those that supposedly were buried. I don't know, I just figured out that.
So I think that that would make sense if we saw all the tools from the same phase that belong. Okay, sorry. So like the tools that were used and buried in room 12 should be seen along with the rest of the material that belongs to the same phase, as to extract some hypothesis on like how what they were used for, and then compared to the ones from the later phase. But what is interesting is that, like, from a first look, they don't appear to be very different in terms of manufacture and traces from the ones of, let's say, different phases in the building. Possibly if we have statistics from the different phases, we can get an idea on this issue. But also, like, with what I do, like with the macroscopic useware that I do, you cannot really tell what the tools were actually used for. So like you can see what the activity they used for, but not the material they was used for. So like, for example, if grinding was for foodstuffs or for minerals or whatever, that would be a conclusion you can make with residue analysis and macroscopic analysis. So with the analysis I'm doing, I can't really say if there is a difference in materials used, because the activities are common. I'm trying to say it's grinding, percussion activities, and it's quite common, like from a first.
So by the first look at it, we can't even say that those tools were discarded because they were not longer practicing their use. They were just discarded for other reasons, since most of them were practically still usable for what they were doing. Like, preliminary comment on this.
It is a bit complicated because, for example, if I remember correctly, we have 3 grinding slabs from room 12, which are considered to be formal tools, and anyway, the tools that you don't throw away very easily, like you would do with a hand tool, like a cobble that you just use for a short time and then you can just throw it away. So grinding slabs are tools that you keep for a long time. These tools from room 12 were not worn out. Even if the material they were the material people wanted to use them for wasn't. I'm sorry, I'm very tired. So even if the materials being processed change, the activity remains grinding. So you can actually grind other materials. Why would you throw away a tool you can use to grind another material? That is a question. Yeah. So, and why would you throw any tools at all? I mean, that is the question. There is a reason behind it, if it's not because they're broken or worn out.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying as well. I mean, it's not a discard of a useless tool, actually.
I would like to say about this deposition in room 12 in Katalymata. This was an one episode deposition, isn't it? I suppose that this fact has to do with, or might have to do with the character of this deposition, which was not merely practical, or might not have been merely practical. What do you think about that?
So I would start with saying that by reading the excavation plot, I realized that there was like very, very few collapsed materials. So the idea is that either something collapsed and then subsequently the room was cleared from this material, or there was no collapse and the room was just filled with this gravel for a reason. If you think that the room was cleared from the collapse, then you would think that all these brownstones would also have been thrown away. Why would you throw the stones from the walls and not throw the rest of the material if you're not going to use it? And in the second case, when if we think that there was no collapse and the room was just filled with this gravel floor, it is in a sense an act, a symbolic act, because it is an act of disuse when it's not needed. It's not practical. You actually are doing something. You are transforming these tools to useless when they don't have to be useless. So it is, in a very broad sense, symbolic. If we want to talk about more specific, I don't know, ideas of this symbolic act, maybe we'll, I don't know, take a very long time of this discussion. But yes, it is very possible, and in a sense it is symbolic in its essence.
Okay, thank you, Eleni.
All right, so if there are no further questions, I think we can call it a day for now. Yes, of course, of course. So, if that was it, we'd like to thank you all for being here in this adventurous session, and see you all tomorrow for day 3 of ScapeCon 2021. Everyone be here. And tomorrow we'll also have the roundtable discussion for everyone who wants to participate, of course. And like our keynote lecture with Yanis Kamilakis. So thank you all. Good night. Thank you all the speakers, and see you tomorrow morning. Bye bye.